the first place is I was raised Catholic, and I think it's from my Catholic upbringing that I really got the idea that everyone deserves dignity and respect, no matter who they are.
Welcome back, y'all, to the Growth Blueprint. We are so excited to be here. We have such a timely guest that I am so excited for y'all to hear from. And our guest today is Adam Westbrook. Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Adam before we get rolling. Adam is a seasoned civic education leader with over 2 decades of experience at the intersection of education, civic engagement, and bridge building across differences. Currently serving as the program director of Generation Citizen New England, which is an amazing organization. He leads a team supporting over 300 teachers in nearly 80 public school partnerships, expanding access to high quality civic education for more than 20,000 middle and high school students across 4 states. His leadership has been pivotal in growing Generation Citizen's regional impact and deepening democratic learning opportunities for youth. So critical, especially right now. Previously, Adam has directed the Center for Community Engagement at Suffolk University, where he built civic leadership programs, guided service learning initiatives, and helped secure national recognition for the university's civic effort. Committed lifelong learner. We love lifelong learners. Adam has held fellowships with Tufts University, the Balkan Summer Institute for Religion and Public Life, and the International Civic Education Exchanges. He's led global service learning programs and taught courses on social change, religion, and philosophy. Adam holds degrees in sociology and religious studies and brings a curious, respectful lens to the conversations we are told not to have, especially around religion and politics. So we have much to learn from you, Adam, today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to be with you both on this lovely Wednesday morning.
Okay, well, Adam, I get to start off the question, and I think it's going to fill in a nice background to what Tabitha has already said. Your career has centered around civic engagement, education, and working across differences. What experiences or influences led you to that path?
Yeah, it's a great question. If I'm really honest and really reflecting, I think the first place is I was raised Catholic, and I think it's from my Catholic upbringing that I really got the idea that everyone deserves dignity and respect, no matter who they are. I'm not much of a practicing Catholic these days, but I think looking back on my history, I think that was one of the biggest places, and that kind of set me on a journey of curiosity around the world and around how do we create a world where people are treated with more dignity and respect. And I think that pushed me to, get involved as a young person in service clubs at my high school and things like that. It was in some of those experiences too that I really felt like I could actually make a difference. I could actually do something. I didn't have to be an elected official. I didn't have to be an elite. I didn't have to have all the connections in the world, but I could actually make a difference right in my own community. And so that kind of continued on into college as well, where I was involved in a lot of civic and community engagement programs as well. And then I think we like to think we set our own path, but sometimes things happen in our lives that then set us on a different trajectory. So when I was in college, 9/11 happened. I was going to college in upstate New York at a very the college I went to had a reputation for being very open, very inclusive, especially for the early 2000s. For example, we had, we celebrated the LGBTQ community, which, it's hard to remember. It's hard to think about this now, but in 2000, 2001, that was a very, very inclusive kind of approach to do things. So 9/11 happened. And of course, it was a horrible day for all the reasons that we're all very aware of. People's lives were destroyed, families were devastated. A new global security apparatus started after 9/11. But for me personally, on my college campus that was so open and inclusive, I saw a ton of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab bias that happened. For example, down the hall from in my dorm, there was a guy who was from New Jersey with Arab descent, who had "Go Home Muslim" written on his door. I saw pretty stark things, both from students and from faculty, around anti-Muslim and anti-Arab kind of sentiment. And it occurred to me at the time, I was like, man, I don't know anything about Islam. And then it occurred to me, like most American Catholics, I didn't know anything about my own tradition, really, even though I had gone through all the things and done all the things. And I said, this seems like something we ought to know about in order to actually engage with people, engage with the world. So that got me really interested in understanding religious traditions as really as a way to understand how we engage with difference. It was also something that wasn't really talked about in school. We didn't learn about, and I just saw this as a huge gap in kind of citizenship development, especially for a multicultural democracy that America is trying to be. It just seems like a massive gap. In the same way that we should know something about biology and history, we should know something about the religious traditions of the world. Because when we don't, we operate only off of the little pieces of things that we know. So for a lot of the folks at my college and university who were not Muslim, the only thing they knew about Islam was that these crazy people just ran planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And when that's all you have no other reaction than to be like, this is scary, this is horrible. And so that kind of set me on a trajectory to really getting interested in intergroup conflict, intergroup understanding, got me interested in interreligious dialogue and things like that, and ultimately ended up getting 2 graduate degrees in religious studies because I'm a big nerd and couldn't get enough of this stuff, and down the path there. So I think those are some of the most significant experiences for me that really kind of helped set me on my path. And then largely those things have just been reinforced since. The sense of empowerment, the sense of importance of understanding people who are different than you, and getting involved in your community.
You've done this work in a lot of different places, Adam, and I think engaging across difference is so challenging, allowing different voices, feelings, opinions, perspectives to be heard. I'd love to know what's some of your wisdom in creating those containers that are inclusive and growth oriented, and especially when there's deep differences. What can you share with us?
Yeah, great question. I think in my experience, we often underestimate how deep those differences can be and how hard differences can be. And I think what we can do, what I've found is that really kind of providing or setting up spaces where people can really engage with that deep difference is really, really important. And having kind of a radical openness toward those differences. Often what I found in some of my interreligious work, for example, you'll often hear somebody say, well, at the end of the day, we all really want the same things. We all believe in the same things. And that's just not true. We don't. We are radically different. I think in the things that we do share, I think there are common things that we do share. But when it comes to living in everyday life, I think that's not enough. What we need to do is we need to figure out kind of, again, it's about that disposition. It's about figuring out how to get yourself okay with that ambiguity, okay with that radical difference. So just a quick example, I was in an interreligious dialogue. I was facilitating this group, and there was an evangelical Christian and some Muslims and some Jews and other folks as well. And the evangelical Christian said, I don't believe that Muslims are going to heaven. And then you saw this kind of like offense happen to several, not necessarily the Muslims actually, but particularly kind of the secular folks in the group, and like that was an attack on non-Christians, blah blah blah. I said, well, do we know? We don't actually know. It's a theological statement, and people are they're able to have their own theological statements. What about when it comes to food? Some people keep kosher or halal. In Denmark, actually, just a few years ago, they outlawed kosher and halal butchering, and they did it they justified it through animal rights language and animal rights ideas around that, which was very, very interesting. So it was kind of this moment where you're like, okay, so the animal rights are above kind of the religious rights of certain minority groups. So I think there are all of these things that we kind of, especially when we're in our own little world, we don't think about until we actually engage with people who are different. And that's why I think having experiences where people are together with people who are different is really, really important. You mentioned in the intro that I took part in the Balkan summer school on religion and public life. So this is a program that my former advisor in my graduate program ran, where he both chooses a part of the world that has dealt with a lot of religious conflict and religious difference. So in this case, it was in the Balkans. But he puts a group together of people who have different commitments to their religious traditions and things like that, including secular folks as well. And we have to kind of spend the 2 weeks together figuring out how to navigate our own dynamics as we're studying and understanding what's happening in the area that we're looking at. And it was really, really interesting, very, very engaging. And, I was very challenged around certain paradigms that I was bringing to the Balkans. So for example, and admittedly, I didn't know a ton about Balkan history. That's another gap, I think, in American history as well. But, there was a large kind of conflict that erupted around folks who were Bulgarian, folks who were Greek, and folks who were Macedonian. Now, from my American eyes, I would read all of these folks as white people. Because I'm coming from a paradigm of like race is the kind of one of the big defining characteristics that differentiates people in our culture. But boy, I tell you, it made a difference if you're Greek or if you're Macedonian or if you're a Bulgarian. And so I think one of the things that I took away from that was the recognition that when you enter a different context, there is a whole different paradigm that you have to kind of get accustomed to and understand before you kind of project your own experience onto that as well. So really having kind of that radical openness, that radical kind of listening, as my former advisor used to always say, he said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth because listening is doubly as important as speaking is. I think that's really, really important.
I love that. And if I can dig into that, Adam, just a little, because I started sort of my dialogue work with interfaith dialogue as well. So I feel this, like I can feel my body like feeling the feels when you're telling these stories. When you say radical openness, for someone who's like, oh, let me try this gray, messy stuff on, what does that mean? What does that look like, sound like, feel like?
Yeah, I think it's about suspending some of your own deepest commitments, around even ethics, what's appropriate. And it's not getting rid of them, but it's temporarily suspending them. And I don't mean to get into jargon here, but so it's like saying, okay, in this instance, for these 2 hours or for this day, I'm going to try to not engage. One of these summer school institutes that my former advisor ran, the content area was around female circumcision or female genital mutilation, depending on what your persuasion is. And so this was a very, very challenging topic for a lot of people. And the challenge was to try to understand it. You can still get to the end and say, this is radically inappropriate, destructive, offensive, blah, 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 if that's your position. But to spend some time really challenging, trying to understand why it exists, what happens, and what the justification is for it before just jumping there. You can still get there. And I think a lot of people who went, a lot of the Americans that I spoke to who went on this particular one, they were like, yeah, my perspective did not change. However, I did learn X, Y, and Z about why this tradition exists, what it is. You could say the same thing about male circumcision. You could say the same thing about abortion. You could do the same thing about gun rights. You could kind of apply that to all sorts of different things. But it's kind of getting into the habit of taking a beat to suspend your own convictions to try to understand something before kind of making a judgment on it. And I think it's and I'm not going to skirt around this, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult to do. But I think that is a skill that needs to be developed, especially in our kind of fast-paced culture today, where it's like people are asked to comment on things and to take a stand on things very, very quickly. I feel like this was a really nice kind of counterpoint to that, and a way to start to build up that habit, as a way to say, yes, and these folks are still people. And these folks don't deserve to have their culture destroyed, and they don't deserve to be imperialized or whatever it might be, despite this thing that we're really against. And so it's a very radical perspective that my former advisor runs. But I think the behavior and the kind of, you mentioned the feels, kind of the physiology of it, I think is also a big piece, which is why I think experience is really the way to do this, is because we're people in bodies we have physical reactions to things, and we need to get more comfortable being uncomfortable with those things in a radical way.
So I have to ask one more question, and Chris, I'm monopolizing Adam, but because I'm here with you, Adam. Like, I believe what you're saying. I've drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago. This is so hard for humans,
So hard.
especially right now, like physically, emotionally, mentally, so hard for humans to do this. We know humans don't do things unless there's something in it for them, right? Like, let's be honest, right? So
Yeah.
what's the why here? Why would people latch onto this radical openness, put themselves through mental, emotional, and physical discomfort? Why? Why would we do this?
Yeah, I think it's a strategy to see people beyond one part of who they are or what they do. And I think that that is really, really important for the future of our democracy today. I'm sure you all have seen all the research that says, one side sees the others as an existential threat. We know from history, when one group sees the other as an existential threat, that usually doesn't end well. That usually results in a lot of violence and a lot of death and a lot of horrible, horrible things. So I think, despite it being really difficult, despite it being kind of almost antithetical to what humans are programmed to do, as you mentioned, I think we don't have a choice. I think it's going to be a requirement for moving forward in a multicultural democracy. Otherwise, I'm afraid we will move in the direction of ethno-nationalism, because you can't get rid of difference. And you can't policy your way out of difference. Always, we need to develop the kind of a culture that is okay knowing that we radically disagree on things, and I don't want to kill you because of that. I'll just share one more thing too. And I really love Harry Boyd's definition of democracy. Harry Boyd has done a lot of civic engagement work in Minnesota, and is kind of one of my heroes, civic educator heroes. He defines democracy as working together on common projects with people you do and don't like. And I think that's so important. And it's a very pragmatic definition. But I think it's right. And when I talk to students about that, it's like the least exciting definition of democracy. But I think it also is really profound as well, because I think if we don't do that, we will find ourselves moving toward a lot of conflict and a lot of, unfortunately, violence, which we've already started to see over the last several through a lot of our decades here in the US.
Yeah, we're not so good at this as humans. You're right. Yeah. Because we keep doing it the same way, right? Like, so I think that's what we're looking at here. I love that definition. Chris, do you want to hop in here?
Oh, do I want to hop in? Oh, do I want to hop in? So, Adam, I think we're going to have you back for like part 2, 3, and 4, because what you're saying is so, I mean, there's so many layers that we could jump into it. I'm going to try to ask a very simple question based on how you answered that. So I'm going to jump to religion for a second, and I'm going
Sure.
to say, as a white belt in understanding this compared to your depth of experience, I've often looked at religion and I've said, if you take all of the religions in the world and you throw them into a pot and you boil them down, what you're really coming down to is principle-based living. And so with that very simple way of looking at it, I have sometimes up close and sometimes at a distance, I just have a respect and appreciation for however anybody wants to live their life. Provided you're a good person, so to speak, whatever that means. But it kind of comes down to principle based. Is that, as you look at it, because you brought up a very, very extreme belief about the mutilation, which as soon as I hear that, I'm like, whoa. Maybe my
Yeah.
definition of things is a little bit too naive. Where does that fit with you, as far as a definition? Is it just insufficient because of those extreme situations that are out there that's only going to take me so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you have a part of it that's correct. I think principled way of living is absolutely a part of it. I just might go a little further and say it's also about the things we do. In some ways, sometimes things we don't even fully understand, like sometimes you might find yourself asking an Orthodox Jew, why don't you mix meat and dairy when you eat? And they may be able to give you some sort of reasoned idea, but they may also say it's what we do. It's just what we do, and that what we do is about the tradition that gives them a sense of belonging, gives them a sense of meaning and purpose and value. Um, that's beyond just kind of the reasoned, rational, principled thing. So I think if we take that seriously, that it is sometimes, I mean, growing up Catholic, like, why do you kneel at this time? Why do you eat the wafer? When you actually give the justification, you're like, this is kind of wild. Like, we're eating the body and blood of this God man. That's kind of out there, but to a lot of people, it's what they do, and that's why they do it. And as I mentioned, I'm not much of a practicing Catholic anymore at this point, but I'll share a quick story. And back in I think it was 2012 or 2013, my uncle died by suicide. It's very, 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 very sad. He was a police officer, had a lot of PTSD that was undiagnosed and undealt with. But I remember getting the news. I was living in Denver, Colorado at the time. I got the news while I was at work. My dad called me. And I told my supervisor I needed to leave for the day, and I drove straight to a Catholic church and sat in the back of the Catholic church. Now, this is kind of strange because I wasn't practicing. I wasn't going to church regularly. I was actually kind of taken aback at how drawn to that space I was. And to be honest, I don't know if I could actually explain it in rational terms, but there was something about being in that space of a Catholic church that connected me to my uncle, to my family, to the generations beyond me. That was kind of beyond just living a principled life. And so I guess that's my answer, is that I think it's the principled life is a piece of it, but I think it's much more beyond that. And I think if we take that seriously, then there are going to be places when the rubber meets the road where we're like, okay, well, this person does things kind of strange who lives next door to me, and that person wears weird clothes, and that person, eats funny food that smells not great to me. Like, those are the kinds of things that, like, we have to figure out how to just deal with. And if we force them to eat the food that I like or dress the way that I like, I mean, cultures have tried this, right? France has tried to outlaw the hijab in public schools, and it causes a lot of tension. And so I think that we need to get better at dealing with real difference.
It's extraordinarily helpful, and I appreciate you sharing the example that you did, the vulnerability of that particular situation, and it it made it clear as you were sharing that. My mind went to I can respect what you did going to the church, and even though you weren't a practicing Catholic, you were not bringing any harm to yourself. You are not bringing any harm to another person. So if I attach the first question, which was about principle living, and then I add on to you're not bringing harm to yourself or any other person, does that bring us closer? There are going to be certain things within the United States. We have freedom of expression, freedom of religion, etc. But there are those boundaries where at some point, for safety, we have to
Yes.
say, well, that's not going to be okay. That's the line. So, and again, I want to be respectful of time, but how, as somebody with your expertise, how do you find that line while still honoring the tradition of, it seems to me how somebody wants to dress, God bless them. Whatever brings you closer to that feeling of connection, I'm all for. But if it's doing harm, then I guess, what
Yeah.
would your thought be?
Yeah. I think, yeah. And I think that is a wonderful question. And I'm sorry to say, I don't know if I have any capital A answers to that question. But I might just problematize it a little bit. And I'm thinking after 9/11, for example, with a lot of folks who didn't understand Islam, understand that kind of thing, there was real fear that they felt when they saw Muslims in the streets, when they saw them on the subway, when all that kind of stuff. I'm not denying that the fear is real. It may be misinformed, but it's real. So I guess the question of harm and the question of fear and the question of discomfort, I think it's a really difficult one. I mean, I used the extreme example before of female circumcision or female genital mutilation to kind of be a little provocative, but I think most examples there's a lot in between that actually is a little challenging. Like that idea of provoking fear. I mean, it's hard. And when people are afraid, this is why, as we were mentioning, we were talking about before, I think having the bodily experience to feel those things, to be dysregulated for a moment and figure out how to kind of pull that back in, or recognize when something is actually a dangerous situation versus when it's not, I think is a practice. And maybe that's part of maybe some of the work that you do, Chris, around character development and discipline and that kind of thing. So I think we're kind of talking about a similar thing, is building a discipline of how to engage with the world and engage with difference, and recognize when your emotions are running too far astray and when they're informing you for your actual safety. I think that there's something about a discipline there.
Yeah, Adam, thank you. My question was around myths and misconceptions, but I think you put so much into that I'd love to give my time back to Tabitha.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that, just that gray area that we talked about before, which hopefully got reported, this feels like that. And this feels like a path through that gray, right? To really have these conversations, really try to understand each other, really do that self-reflection. I know when I've been in these conversations and things have come up for me, that's education for me. When I feel heated in a discussion, that's about me. Like, why is this elevating me? And that sort of information, I think, is what's going to help us navigate the gray. It's just hard. So we got to
It's
be
really hard.
we got to be able to be in the hard messy so that we can get to the other side of this.
Yeah.
Well, and we are running short on time, and I do want to kind of be respectful of that. But as we begin to close out, Adam, what's the legacy you hope to leave? I mean, your work has really kind of been leaning into this important piece. What's the legacy you hope to leave, or the lasting impact in civic education, in community engagement? What do you hope happens when you are done with this work?
We're leaving on a really small question,
I know. We
Yeah.
we like to do the softballs, just throw you the like.
Yeah, no, I'll kind of keep it short because we're time here. But I think I'll go back to what Barack Obama said when he left office, is that I want young people to walk away knowing that the greatest and arguably the most important role in a democracy is the role of citizen, and that the only way this lasts is if we all participate, if we all do that. And there are certain skills, knowledge, and values that need to drive those things so that we all can live as full lives as possible. Democracy is the best thing we've come up with yet. Maybe somewhere down the road we'll come up with something better, but so far there's nothing better from my experience to really protect people's rights, to be able to move together forward. And this is why the American experiment is so important. If we really truly want to live in a multicultural democracy where everybody feels empowered, it's going to be messy, and we want to be prepared for that. And I think that will be the best path forward. And so I hope that hopefully I can make a little dent with the young people and the folks that I'm lucky enough to interact with over my career, where they feel empowered to do to get involved and to be a leader. I don't want us to end up in, I keep using the term elected oligarchy, which is without citizen involvement, it's just an elected oligarchy. And that's not the way that this was supposed to be. And so the everyday people need to make this happen too.
So incredible last words before Chris closes us out. And I will just say, we'll put this in the notes, but Generation Citizens doing some really incredible work. So check them out. They're all over. So check them out when you get a chance, for sure.
Awesome.
Adam, I really want to thank you for giving us the time today. Our hope when we started the Growth Blueprint is by having conversations like these, we expand people's awareness. We take these conversations from not just a nice to have, but it's kind of a mandatory. If you're running a department, a team, an organization, a profit, a nonprofit, having conversations like these are critically important to bringing the team together to be able to kind of manifest its total potential. And certainly the depth of experience that you have in this particular area is it's eye-opening, and it's just so important. So again, it's expanded me, and I'm sure it'll expand our audience. So thank you so much for giving your time and your wisdom today. We really appreciate it. And for our friends
Likewise.
Yes. Thank you. For our friends that are listening, thank you for tuning into the Growth Blueprint podcast. On behalf of myself, Chris Rappold, and my partner, Tabitha May-Tolub, we appreciate you tuning in. Please like and share the Growth Blueprint podcast with your friends. We promise we'll continue to do our very best to bring great minds like Adam to you, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you on the next episode.